Squash Soup. Butternut Squash Soup is probably one of the easiest soups that you can make, and it only has 5 ingredients, which is some vegetable broth, onions, garlic, some spices and herbs, and of course the star of the show, which is the butternut squash. Because butternut squash is kind of like awkward in shape, I always like to cut the rounder part or separate the rounder part from the skinny top part. And just so you know, when cutting up a butternut squash, you need a sharp knife because, as ironic as it sounds, when your knife is sharp, you're less likely to cut and injure yourself because you're not putting as much effort into slicing into or chopping up something. So I remove the head of the butternut squash from the bottom just to make it easier to peel. And I'm also going to cut off the stem part. And then we're just going to peel the skin off. Peeling is probably one of the things that I like the least when it comes to cooking. I find it to be tedious. It always makes my hand hurt even though my peeler is sharp. And it's just one of those like necessary evils that I really don't like doing. But here I am for the sake of good food. I'll do almost anything. So another reason why I separate the top of the squash from the bottom of the squash is because usually at the bottom, that's where all the seeds and the guts of the squash are. So if you cut it in half, you will see all that, and that's what we're going to spoon out. And then at the top, it is just fully butternut squash. So there's no seeds to separate. I'm gonna take my spoon and just dig out all of the seeds and the guts and put it onto my plastic wrap. Usually I would save these seeds to plant or to just dry out, but this time around I'm just going to put them into my composter. We'll just dig it out to the best of our ability. It's okay if some of the little furry stuff is still in there. It's not going to harm us in any way. I'm gonna go ahead and start cutting the squash into chunks. The smaller, it doesn't have to be extremely small, but the smaller the better in terms of how long it'll take for the squash to soften. So I'm just making them into some chunks, or even, I don't know, maybe rectangles more so than chunks. And then after I chunk these, we're going to move over to our stove. To a preheated pot, I'm drizzling in some olive oil and then adding in my chopped onions and sauteing this until it is translucent. After the onions, I'm adding in my squash, and we're going to saute this up until it has softened a little bit. I'm going in now with my chopped garlic cloves, my spices, which are some salt, pepper, dried sage, and dried rosemary. In this step, we would also be adding in some fresh ginger. Unfortunately, I do have an intolerance to ginger, so I'm omitting it from this pot, but it will be in the recipe in the description. I'm covering this with some vegetable broth, and we're going to have all this come to a boil. The broth is now boiling, so I'm going to bring this back down to a simmer, and we're just gonna let this cook through until our butternut squash has softened. It's been about 20 minutes, and I just wanted to show you how the butternut squash is breaking up just with a rubber spatula. So that means it is finished. So now I'm gonna take it off the heat, and we're going to move it over to our work table. Now it's time to actually puree our soup. So you can let your soup cool down a bit first before doing this part, just for safety reasons, but I'm gonna go in carefully with my ladle. We're going to put the entire pot into my Vitamix, or you could also just use a regular blender. Also, because this liquid is hot, when I put on the lid, I also put a towel over it, just to avoid any potential, spillage, or having the blender, the liquid come up and burn me. And then I just slowly, I put it on the lowest level possible, and we're just going to slowly puree the soup. Once everything is pureed, this is where you kind of test the consistency for you. If you want your soup to be thick like this, you would leave it as is, and if you want it to be thinner and runnier, you would just add more vegetable broth. This is the consistency that I do want, so let's move over to my favorite part of these episodes, which is the plating. Since my soup is already hot and ready to go, I'm just gonna take my soup bowl and pour it directly in from my blender. And then I'm going to garnish it with a dried sage leaf. And there you have it, butternut squash soup. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And remember, healthy does not mean boring. See you next time.